Greetings, friends of liberty. Although I naturally often use my schooner Daydream to transport refugees fleeing the terror, when a day of leisure is afforded us, Marguerite and I often bypass Calais altogether, heading further north along the French coast and beyond, sometimes venturing all the way to Haarlem in the Netherlands. We first take the canal east and then the river Sparn south, docking directly in the town centre. There we find the most delightful restaurants for dining out of doors and, more importantly for Marguerite, all manner of botanical and commercial establishments selling tulip bulbs, a great variety of which she purchases in sacks, bringing them back with us to London to have planted in our estate gardens. However, turning to 21st century Haarlem, in your New York City, we find not tulip bulb middlemen, but something of even greater value. Perhaps the greatest chain of charter schools in America today, originally called Haarlem Success and now Success Academy. Founded by Eva Moskowitz, former councilwoman from 1999 to 2005, Moskowitz decided that she had better things to do than argue endlessly with her recalcitrant Democratic colleagues over school reform, and instead, in 2006, created her ever-expanding chain of now 47 schools. These regularly outperform not only all schools in New York City, but also the state of New York itself. In one year, their top 5 schools receiving spots 1 through 5. Robert Pondiscio, our author of How the Other Half Learns, Equality, Excellence, and the Battle Over School Choice, also, like Moskowitz, decided on a radical redirection of his life. Previously a finance guy earning a comfortable salary, he decided to become a K-12 teacher, and then a member of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, a K-12 educational think tank. In 2016, intrigued, as many are with Moskowitz's success, he decided, with her permission, to embed himself for a year in her Bronx 1, a school less than a mile from where he himself had taught public elementary school at PS 18 in the South Bronx. Was Miss Moskowitz's success due, as some said, to the fact that they only enrolled the smartest applicants? Was it perhaps that they're a superb cram school drilling kids to robot-like efficiency in taking their reading and math tests? Or was it instead the many millions garnered from their New York hedge fund supporters? We arrive, as Robert does, not on the first day of school, but about 2 weeks earlier, at what we might call a parental orientation session in the beginning of August. Among others, Moskowitz stresses to new parents how Success Academy needs their support in frequent rallies at City Hall or at other political events, since the very existence of her schools depends on publicly fighting the enormously powerful New York teachers' unions and their huge political clout, who, here and around the country, are jealous of any competition. Success Academy and charter schools in general present a threat to their state monopoly, since they're not unionized and much more successful than many pathetic union-run schools, which is oftentimes very obvious to see, since both types are sometimes co-located in the very same school buildings, and you can hear and see the differences in the nearby classrooms. As the days go by, Pondiscio sees that one remarkable aspect of the school is how much feedback and knowledge is gathered and utilized constantly, not unlike the New York Stock Exchange, with real-time info and a constant awareness of important changing conditions which optimize student learning. So, for example, supervisors come in early in the morning to check that the physical plant is in immaculate condition. Green, yellow, or red circles follow kids around from class to class at times so the teachers can know their daily behavioral status. Student attention is constantly regulated to keep their focus on learning, such as by redirecting the child back to his task when he's misbehaving, sometimes ignoring bad behavior, sometimes praising students exhibiting good behavior, or in making sure that they're tracking the teacher with their eyes. All this effective classroom control lets teachers have bigger classes, thus saving money for other things. Moskowitz herself invites constant feedback by asking, for example, what was the craziest thing that happened today to her young teachers, or making suggestions such as in eliminating the word like from conversations, which habit also irks me. In addition, schools are given 5 tests per year so that not only can they regularly measure academic progress, but when the time comes for state testing, the administrators know pretty well how each child will do. Finally, this mindset carries right over to off hours, with Moskowitz explicitly telling staff, "We're not off duty on the weekend. Does everyone understand that?" In addition to this constant monitoring and awareness, yet another aspect which Pondiscio reaffirms of success is culture, but which has been known now for over a decade, is the enormous expenditure of energy and commitment required of parents, at a level above that of virtually all other schools. Parents are told about their obligations from the very beginning, as for example with a dress code, and I quote, "Uniforms every day, clean every day, make sure you have a system so that the uniform is on your child's back every day. We pull up pants and we check socks, no white socks allowed. If the kids don't pass, they're not admitted that day." And here is another quote from an administrator. "These are not recommendations. If we're going to reach the success we talked about, you must do these things." And what are some of these other things? Reading 6 books aloud every week through the end of the school grade, 2nd grade, and checking and logging homework. And if all this doesn't work, Success Academy, unlike many public schools, never socially promotes kids because they understand how destructive that is. If the kids are not reading at the required level, they stay back a year. In fact, the school has the confidence, or perhaps the chutzpah, to actually give parents, from 2017 on, their own investment report card, which some parents understandably resent. Are these sound reasons? Are there sound reasons for all this extra parental work? Yes, since studies show that the words and knowledge that children absorb from parents while growing up makes an enormous difference in their cognitive development. Kids from professional class households heard more than 2,150 words an hour, from working class 1,250, and from public assistance 600. In addition, low-income parents tend to give more verbal prohibitions and less encouragement. All this adds up to an enormous disadvantage for kids from these low-income environments, and that deficit is precisely what Success Academy is trying to erase. And their results pay off with their students regularly reading texts 2 years ahead of their age groups. Pondiscio here also mentions the related point that for decades in public education, reading was and often still is treated like a skill, like learning to ride a bicycle or to juggle. But the reality is that reading comprehension, perhaps counterintuitively, is really connected to what was just mentioned previously. Both the knowledge that the child has, often much of it absorbed from his parents, and also the knowledge of what specific words mean. As education researcher E.D. Hirsch has documented at length, and as Pondiscio himself repeatedly observed in his own teaching, if kids have subject knowledge, then they'll understand the reading passage. If they don't, to the degree that they don't, they won't. So again, reading actually isn't a skill at all, but a test of your pre-existing knowledge, both of word meanings and the specific subject. Have there been failures for Moskowitz? In a way, in 2014, when she tried to create her own first high school based on Success Academy's standards, Success Academy High School for the Arts, taking the students directly from her graduating middle schoolers. This, unfortunately, was a failure at first and indicates a potential negative for some kids subsequently of Moskowitz's approach. The kids really couldn't study well on their own, needing a teacher close by, and without their accustomed supervision, were badly behaved. The teachers, on the other hand, were all Grottonian and Exeter types and had no clue how to deal with rowdy inner-city adolescents. In a nutshell, we might simply say that those kids who were subjected to years of Success Academy's 2-2-2 reading approach, forced to always look at the page, holding the book in both hands, with feet always touching the ground, finally had a taste of freedom, and they weren't going to let that go to waste. Subsequently, Moskowitz brought in her own team of teachers, and now the graduates of this high school regularly get SAT scores higher than much more affluent kids. Still, for her graduates, as well as those from other top charter schools, success in college remains relatively elusive, being much harder for everyone coming from an inner-city, low-income neighborhood. But at the same time, her rates of success in college are many times higher than the rates for nearby inner-city public schools. Partly this is a problem rooted in the dysfunction of the black family. This dysfunction first explicitly mentioned in the Coleman Report of 1966 and also famously by Democratic Senator Patrick Moynihan, who for his trouble received endless grief from the liberals and race hustlers alike. But given that, for example, as Pondiscio notes, 71% of blacks are born to unwed mothers compared to 30% of whites, the very fact of black familial instability poses an enormous problem hanging over everyone's heads. How much does this damaged family structure inevitably affect kids and their cognitive development? To put it bluntly, is it really Moskowitz's fault that the college graduation rates of her students are lower than whites? Or is it instead rooted in the nature of the coercive society that has damaged black families in so many different ways for so long? By the drug war, public education, gun control, affirmative action, and the welfare state. And so the question remains, precisely how much can one school system, however brilliant, make up the difference? No one really knows. I give this book an A- because strictly with regard to his task of describing Haarlem's success for a year, Pondiscio succeeds brilliantly. Are there any mistakes? Yes, a few. And these occur because Pondiscio believes in public education and thus misses problems stemming directly from the intrinsic inferiority of public education. First, he constantly talks about various bad techniques of public schools, such as we've discussed, they not understanding that reading comprehension comes through knowledge and is not a skill. However, public schools in general are much more likely to choose bad techniques in reading and many other areas. Public schools in general are not accountable to the parents, who have to pay regardless and, unless they have the money, don't have the ability to remove their children. So the very innovation that he sees in Success Academies, such as at times using headphones and in-class cameras to give teachers real-time feedback, helping them improve enormously, or the safety that they provide to children, so unlike inner-city modern schools, or the dress codes that they impose, which eliminate clothes as a distraction, all derive from the freedom Miss Moskowitz has to create exactly the kind of school she wants, unlike in public schools. Secondly, he asserts that Success Academy is not scalable because it's so dependent on the brilliance of Eva Moskowitz, and she is not scalable. She's unique and can't be replicated, at least with present gene technology. But this would be like saying there was only one Wilt Chamberlain, so we can't have any other good basketball players. The reality is, in a free society educationally, which we don't have today because of the huge public school monopoly of 90% of K-12 schools, the power of teachers' unions, numerous other educational entrepreneurs as good as Miss Umarowitz would arise, just as Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Kobe Bryant, Luka Doncic, Shaquille O'Neal, LeBron James, and Magic Johnson also arose after Wilt Chamberlain. Public education prevents these geniuses from creating great new school chains. Thirdly and finally, he doesn't see that the massive emphasis on testing that came with Common Core is an expression of the stupidity and inefficiency of the public school system and its top-down federal control. Because public schools are relatively inefficient if you make them do testing all the time, they will simply have to give up many other valuable subjects, losing programs in the arts, sciences, and history. The solution is to get rid of public education with its intrinsic, pedagogical, and operational inefficiency, which tragically damages tens of millions of children every year. On that note of irritated admiration, I bid you well and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.